Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast, where the Interpros are coming thick and fast now. The URC is really heating up. Leinster beating Munster on Saturday in a brilliant game at the Aviva Stadium. Connacht hosting Leinster at a sold-out sports ground this Saturday. Then we're into Europe. More Interpros over Christmas, more Europe in January, and then a well-needed weekend off for a lot of people. But joining us on this week's podcast, Bernard Jackman as usual. And I'm also delighted to welcome former Connacht prop JP Cooney onto the pod. JP, great to have you on board this week.
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil. Some exciting games coming up.
Yeah, there is. And we'll start by actually just going back over last week's big one at the Aviva Stadium. Leinster 21, Munster 16. We'll talk specifically about the smaller parts of this and Leinster's performance and Munster's performance, Birch, as we go along. But to start off with, I just thought this entire game was so much fun. It had everything you'd want in an Interpro. 50,000 people watching it. Most of the big internationals were playing. Skill level was top quality. There was bite. It went down to the wire. Had absolutely everything. And I just thoroughly enjoyed those 80 minutes. That's just what I want to say to kick things off, Birch.
Yeah, look, and I agree. I had a few people grumbling saying it wasn't a good game. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, look, if you're a Leinster fan, you're probably disappointed with some of their skill sets and breakdown work, and particularly in the 22 after they had momentum. I'm thinking of the Jack Crowley turnover and the John Hodnett turnover, and obviously there was a little bit of wayward passing at times, but in general it was a proper Irish derby. And you know, speaking to some friends of mine who work in the media in the UK and in France, they're just blown away by the fact that we can get 50,000 people to a game, 4 or 5 weeks after the World Cup. And provincial rugby has just bounced back into gear. And it's not just that game. Like, I've been lucky enough to be down Thomond. You've been down in the sports ground. Like, it's kind of built up really nicely again. And there's obviously unbelievable talent on the field. Some of them players like Caelan Doris and Jack Conan, Tyg Byrne, that we know a lot about, and then there's new kids starting to develop and show. And obviously the out half, it was a real chance for Jack Crowley to go head to head with Ross Byrne. That didn't happen because of injury, but then we saw him go head to head with Kieran Frawley, and Frawley really grasped his opportunity as well. So Craig Casey thought it very well when he was on the field, and then Connor came on and added to it. I thought Porter and Archer had an unbelievable ding-dong at scrum time, which is fascinating in its own right, and I'd be interested in JP's feelings on that. But yeah, there's loads of little things. Thomas Ahern at 6 and being very comfortable. Zebo being back and playing very well. And the game at the death, obviously, when Conor Murray made that break up the left wing, you're thinking Munster going to basically rob Leinster again. Like they did, win the game late, like they did in the semi-final, and then at the end, Leinster are pushing for that bonus point, which is nearly part and parcel of what they do every week in the URC. And Tyg Byrne gets an unbelievable turnover to deny them it. So I know, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, go ahead, JB.
I was just going to say, Neil, as a spectacle within Irish rugby, I mean, like Munster and Leinster is, one of the old rivalries within the game here in Ireland. And I think it's great for the game. It's great for the sets of fans. That rivalry seems to have closed recently in the last couple of years. Obviously enough, Munster dominated it for a long time within the 90s and the early 2000s, and Leinster dominated. Munster maybe haven't been as close in the contest over the last, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. So it is great as a spectacle from I suppose from a neutral spectator. It is great to see, that specific game, that specific fixture being a lot tighter. It just does great wonders for the sport, that you can get 50,000 people to come to a game like that and thoroughly enjoy it. I know what Birch was saying there. Yeah, there is probably Leinster fans that, may not be happy with certain inaccuracies throughout their game. But overall, I think everyone else that was watching it thought it was a great game, a fantastic game to watch.
Yeah, and as you said, it did feel for a few years, and it was, I think the specific phrase was used, that it felt like when Munster were coming up against Leinster in the last few years, that they were shrinking a little bit. They almost felt beaten before they went out there. you could see off the back of that win in May how much has changed, that they just went out straight away and took it to Leinster right from the first minute. To focus on Leinster, Birch, and we'll get back to Munster later on in the podcast, but to focus on Leinster, you have, like both of you were saying, they'll be frustrated about elements of their attack. They probably had more players that looked a little bit off the pace compared to Munster did. But if you're flipping it around to positives, where in the past we've always talked about Leinster coming flying out of the gates to start the season, like they will still be confident that these players can find those extra gears over the next few months.
No, 100%. And like, it was uncharacteristic of Hugh Keenan, to not be accurate.
Brian as well,
So there's no major issue. They just would have loved to have put Munster away, convincingly, because I think it just gives Munster renewed hope. When you saw the two teams on paper, to go back to back, traveling to Dublin and winning one, being very competitive in the other, increases their confidence, I think. And I think that trophy, we all felt that trophy could be a turning point. Not just beating Leinster semi-final, but going and winning it then in Cape Town could be a turning point for Munster. And they're starting to develop, some really exciting players, and not develop them. They've been, we've known about Hodnett, we've known about Tom Ahern, etc. We know about Craig Casey, we know about Jack Crowley for a while, but they're now very comfortable up against the best in Ireland, and you'd think there's more growth in them. So what Roundtree and his coaches have done there is very impressive. And I think Irish rugby needs 4 strong provinces really, but that Munster-Leinster rivalry, commercially as much as anything else, is really important for the game, to be able to give Munster 25,000 people in Thomond Park, when Leinster play away, and obviously for Leinster to get a full house the other night is phenomenal.
We've spoken about the criticism of the rivalry in recent seasons, that people might have said that it felt like some of the newer players coming through weren't really having a full appreciation for what a Munster-Leinster rivalry was, because of how one-sided it had become. I look at someone like Joe McCarthy the other night. I get the feeling that guy does not like Munster, because he was properly at it. And if you were a Leinster fan, he was one of the big positives I think you were taking away. JP, we've known about his size and stuff for a couple of years now that he's been on the scene, but you can really start to see him throw it about the place and play ever so slightly on the edge. Sometimes he's going a little bit beyond it, and he probably gets away with it, and that's something referees are going to be looking at. But probably in the last 6 months or so, he's really looked like someone who is starting to throw his weight around the pitch.
Yeah. We're on the side of caution here with my next comments, but playing on that edge is exactly what you want out of a big physical lock. Dishing out physicality in the breakdown, in the maul tackle area. If you were to construct a second row in a lab, I think you wouldn't be too far away from what Joe McCarthy is at the minute, or even what he can become. I don't think it's hard to see actually any areas where he's lacking. He's well able to do, what you might call the dirty work, hitting rucks, being physical in a maul, setting a maul. I think for him to receive a ball and set a maul, I think he does a fantastic job at that. Really gives the Leinster forward, a platform. But outside of that, he's athletic, he's well able to carry the ball, he's well able to pass the ball. He's a very exciting prospect, not just for Leinster, but for as we've seen already in parts for Irish rugby as well. He's definitely one to watch for the future. And there's big conversations going on around, what will the next World Cup squad look like. I think he could be like a linchpin there.
Birch?
Yeah, I think players are very good judges, especially players who train or play with other players. And to be fair, to talk about McCarthy for the last year and a half has been, an excitement around what he could bring. I think there was obviously a lot of controversy about, his selection and Jean Kleyn's non-selection, and Jean Kleyn going on to win a World Cup medal, and absolutely brilliant for Jean, what he did. But I think what we saw the other night is probably what Farrell was thinking about was that carry. I think the area that probably Joe McCarthy has the upper hand on Jean Kleyn is an ability to carry well. Jean Kleyn it's not a weakness, but it's certainly not a strength. Is where I think it can be an area where Joe McCarthy becomes incredibly important to teams, just making average ball, good ball, being able to draw in two defenders. He moves very well. I think he moves better on across the ground than maybe Kleyn. And we don't produce many second rows of that ilk. I mean, Connacht went and got Joe Joyce back, and he's that type of player. But I think McCarthy's probably more X factor about him. But he's been very good for Connacht, and he's Irish qualified, obviously, but came through the English pathways as such. And if you look at the type of player that we sometimes recruit from, the Quinn Roos, etc., we've gone off to try and bring that in from abroad, because they're not basically 10 a penny here. But we now have one that I think we should be getting excited about, and he could become a proper player. I think like him and James Ryan's combination for Leinster, if he can bed down that second row tight head lock spot, they're quite similar in some ways. But then you look at, he obviously is more bulk than James Ryan, but they're both very physical. They're both mean, and then Leinster have enough back row players, and they've Dan Sheehan who can kind of give them more carry as well.
You brought up Andrew Porter as well a few minutes ago, and we might go looking at that scrum now. And Bert, you were talking about how there was a proper ding-dong battle between himself and Stephen Archer at the scrum, where there was decisions going both ways. And I think, to Chris Busby's credit, he did a pretty good job on the night, considering how messy both players were making it for him. You could look at Andrew Porter and say he was getting dominance over Archer, but you could point out to Porter doing certain things. You could also point out Stephen Archer dropping down a couple of times. Both players were making it very, very messy in that situation. On Porter specifically, though, it does feel like we've come out of the World Cup now with there's a bit of scrutiny around him, and his scrummaging technique is being looked at a little bit more, and referees are probably a little bit more wary of it. Robin McBride was asked about it during the week, and I'll just read out the quotes here. He said, we're slowly eroding it, to be honest. He said of the perception that Porter is an illegal scrummager. I don't think we're going to change it overnight, but the more they look at Andrew and the way he's scrummaging, that perception has changed. Or will change. So it seems to be that from Leinster side of things anyway, they're confident that referees will come around to accept what Porter is doing, and that his technique is the correct way and it's the legal way. There's probably another school of thought out there, though, that says Andrew Porter probably needs to adapt more to the referees rather than the referees adapting to him. What way would both of you be looking at this?
Yeah, I'm interested in JP's thoughts on it, but I think Porter is a naturally very aggressive loosehead, and when you're as aggressive as he is and you have the power that he has, it often isn't the perfect picture. You know what I mean? Because the tight head isn't going to give you exactly what you want. You know what I mean? And they're going to twist and turn and go up and down to try and take away that natural power advantage you have. And the biggest thing I think going into this, or in the World Cup, which was starting to maybe get on referee's mind, was his bind. And I think he has started to try and rectify that, but he can't. I would hate to see him become a passive scrummager. I don't think it's in his nature. But he does have to basically get it. I thought it was a passing battle. I didn't think Archer won the battle. I thought Porter overall was probably dominant. But I thought Archer did a great job of locking out certain scrums, and Munster being able to get the ball away, and used all his experience. And I don't know. There seemed to be so much focus on that side of the scrum. I thought it became a compelling part of the game, to be honest. And I thought Busby was quite good in his communication. Obviously, Leinster tried to fade once, and Archer sometimes he didn't bring his feet back up, so he got very long-legged. But I thought I was very impressed by Archer's ability to stay in a shit position and just hang in there. You know what I mean? Like, I know, but like that's part of the battle sometimes. And JP would know this, is that you don't always get it the way you want, but the really dogged props, when they get stuck there, they just take their medicine and and hang on for dear life. And I thought at times Porter got underneath Archer's ribs. There would have been a lot of pain. But he managed to lock it out long enough and I admire that in him. And look, you don't get to be the most capped Munster player of all time, which Stephen Archer is now, without being adaptable and dogged.
There's a lot to be said for experience, JP, isn't there?
There is. Yeah. Going back though to what we were talking about with regards perception of Andrew Porter, like, unfortunately he has that, perception at the moment. I would imagine that a lot of coaches, opposition coaches, and I've seen it done in the past where they might be sending videos to a specific referee. If they knew a referee, they were like, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe counterintelligence. They'd be asking, highlighting this. I don't think he's legal here. I don't think he's legal there. And the referee can't help. They might ignore it or they might say that, but they can't help but go into a game with the perception that, okay, some of those clips that I've seen, don't know how legal he is, so on and so forth. Like, referees have certain cues to look at, in terms of what way to ref it, in terms of what way to give the penalty. Normally what they would try and look at is, if the scrum goes down, is it the tight head's knees that hit the ground first, or is it the loose head's elbow? And, for driving straight, they would look at, well, if the scrum is crabbing across, are the loose heads out or are they tight with the hooker? Now, with a perception that Andrew Porter has, it might be a case that the referee is scrutinizing him so much to see if there's any infringement there that might not necessarily check on the opposition tight head as much. He is an aggressive scrummager, Birch, and that's something that, every prop or every pass prop, maybe everyone except us playing against him, loves to see. Maybe he needs to be a small bit smarter in terms of the scrums he goes after. And what I mean is, maybe inside their own 22, he doesn't need to blow the opposition off the ball. He doesn't need to have that risk where he can, really go after a tight head, but might sacrifice a penalty. That he just develops a clear, concise, perfect picture for a ref, so that the ref in that game has a perception built up that, hey, look, this is a good picture. I like what I'm seeing here. So that if there is a scrum where they do have to go for where Andrew Porter wants to go full hog at it, that he might be afforded a small bit more. He won't be scrutinized as much. I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it. I don't know. It's a tough one. Like, refs are given cues to look at, even past players that are, front rows. We could look at it and give it 50-50 either. It's a very hard, takes two to tango, I think maybe is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, 100% JP, I agree with you. And I thought it was just, there was two of them tangoing, to use your word, at the weekend. And it was really interesting. I think certainly in that New Zealand game, and obviously that's the biggest game since Saturday that he's played. I felt he probably, and there's only 3 penalties I think against him, but the third one was the one that obviously gave them the cushion. And when you hadn't got any change out of first 2, that's probably when you just need to say, okay, I'm not going to convince Wayne Barnes in the course of this game that what I'm doing is illegal or is legal. But also the last one I think was the one where they had where the tight end had no back row beside him. You know what I mean? So again, you're a loose head prop, and you see an opportunity to maybe make a game changing turnover or whatever. So it's very hard. But I agree with you. Yeah, he's going to have to just manage that. Robin McBride is playing the game, and it's just really important that he gets that out there, that he is mainly legal. You're never going to be totally legal, but mainly legal. And referees start looking at other areas of the scrum rather than coming in with a mindset that they have to watch Andrew.
We'll come back to this game when we're talking about Munster in a little while. I do want to bring Connacht in here though, because that's where they come in against Leinster this weekend at the sports ground. Now it was a strange couple of weeks for Connacht, all told. They lose against Edinburgh, which is probably the really frustrating one. Then they get that win down in South Africa against the Sharks, and at the weekend just gone, heavily rotated team take 50 points off the Bulls, and are set up now to play Leinster this weekend. When you look at the teams they've picked over the last couple of weeks, JP, it does probably feel like they've had half an eye on this game against Leinster at the sports ground this weekend. But then on the flip side is, can conceding 50 points down in South Africa and taking a heavy beating like that take a little bit of the momentum out of you?
It's definitely not helpful anyway, Neil. I know that much, but I suppose it's the measure of the team, right? And yeah, look, I don't know if that's the scenario where they had maybe one eye on the Leinster game. Bulls have a fantastic home record against Irish opposition, so I don't know if they were very hopeful of getting a result there, but getting pasted by or by allowing in 50 points, definitely not help. Look, it'll be a measure of where Connacht are at the moment, in my opinion, that they can put a performance together off the back of that Bulls defeat. I think they'll have to try and forget about it pretty quickly. That's what they want to do, because given Leinster's performance last weekend, which they might not have been entirely happy about, and there were areas for improvement. That's the scary thing about Leinster. They beat Munster, and there are still areas for improvement. I'd imagine that Leinster will be fixing those small inaccuracies and trying to let it out in full force that in the sports grounds this weekend. So yeah, look, Connacht will have to move on from that. They've no option only to move on from it. Can it hurt them? Yeah, it definitely takes the sting out of their momentum given the start they had. But yeah, they'll have to snap out of it quick enough.
What are there areas in Leinster's game, Birch, that you think Connacht can expose this week?
Yeah, look, I think Leinster's defence, and obviously there is going to be a change of mindset there. And Nina Barr is a brilliant defence coach. But as he changes that, like, it'd be a miracle if it was perfect in a week. You know what I mean? Because it's going to be a pretty drastic change. And I think we saw for the Craig Casey try, like, there was nearly confusion in terms of the system, because if you're playing the blitz defense that the box play, and I don't, Nina Barr wasn't there last week, but effectively Robbie jumped out of the line to try and hit Scanlon. Scanlon got the ball away. Gary tried to jump and didn't make the tackle on Zebo. But it's not, if that was the box, there'd be a winger up very high as well, so Gary wouldn't have to be as wide, you know what I mean? So you're basically coming from further out to in, so you could effectively have two players on Zebo rather than just Gary. So, you know, obviously Nina Barr will probably start to implement that this week, but sometimes it takes maybe 6-7 weeks where you're caught in two systems while you totally get comfortable with what the other system looks like. So Connacht are going to have to hope that that's the case and that there is weaknesses. And the Leinster defence hasn't been brilliant for, I would say, a long time. I know it's just their attack is so good. And also they're very lucky that a lot of teams throw the match effectively because they come to the RDS without any real hope or belief of winning it. You know what I mean? So, which is great by Leinster, and they've earned that right, but it doesn't help them, or hasn't helped them win trophies. So there's definitely an area there to be improved upon, and I don't think it'll be a quick fix. And I think Connacht have the attack to ask questions of that and see how quickly they've all learned their new roles. And that has to be the area that they back themselves to be a core part of trying to get a result.
Yeah, and to add to it then as well, you've Connacht who are going to be much changed from the weekend. Mac Hansen's going to be in there. You imagine Tom Farrell's going to be back in the centre. They'll have more reinforcements, or Caelan Blade is going to be starting the game. Colin Riley picked up an injury, and Blade had been playing off the bench over the last couple of weeks. So Cian Prendergast is going to be back and available again, JP. So there have been, I think, like a lot of teams over these few weeks, because we're in a week-on-week right through to the middle of January without a break, they've been fairly selective over their matchday squads and their starting 15s and carefully kind of tallying up the minutes. And, you know, if they can get a result against Leinster this weekend, they're in an absolutely cracking position, and you have to start talking about them as proper contenders. I know it's a big if they beat Leinster this weekend.
Yeah, like, it's going to be a tall ask. Like, we've seen Connacht throughout the course of this season apply themselves in bursts, you know, and, you know, they might have a great, like, I've yet to see an 80-minute full performance from Connacht. Like when they apply themselves and when they get their game plan right and execute what they're trying to do, yeah, I think they're like, I'm not trying to be biased here, but they're one of the best teams to look at in the league.
Oh, they are, yeah.
Yeah. But the question I would have is an 80 performance, an 80-minute performance is what will be required against Leinster. They will need to, like, Munster, I think, let Leinster off the hook when they actually had him on the rack. I think Stephen Archer getting held up. Like, I think that was a massive moment in the game. A huge moment in the game. If Connacht want to beat Leinster, they're going to have to execute on every opportunity that they have, as well as trying to shut Leinster down at the same time. It's a tall ask, and it will require the 80-minute performance to do it. Anything sub that, I'd be giving it to Leinster. It'll be interesting enough as well to see what the actual team will be that Leinster sends down. Will they have one eye on their fixture the following week, which is
La Rochelle?
Exactly. And I know that they'll definitely want to win there. They'll definitely be targeting that fixture. So it's a very interesting contest for a number of reasons, Neil.
Let's come back to Munster then and talk specifically about them, because most of what we did over that game was around Leinster. But Birch, granted they lost, but Jack Crowley looks the real deal now at this stage, doesn't he?
Yeah, look, that was like, he was excellent the week before against the Stormers. He's just tough as nails, but he has all the silky bits as well. He's getting a chance to goal kick, every week now, and because in fairness, like he had to fight to get his position with Healy and Joey, but now he's got it. He's obviously got into the Irish team, and like honestly, looking at him on Saturday night, you'd have no fear for him being the starting 10 for Ireland, and you also get the sense that Munster can build a team around him, and they're starting to do that. And they backed, in fairness to Roundtree and Prendergast, they basically they nailed their colour to the mast last year that he was the man, and obviously that led into Healy leaving, and they backed him ahead of Joey, and Joey went to go to South Africa, didn't get any game time. It was very much let him develop, make sure he knows that we trust him. And yeah, Andy Farr was at the game, and I think he would have been really happy seeing Crowley in a match of that intensity do what he did. And also, I said it earlier, I think Frawley as well might just have more upside than Ross Byrne in terms of athleticism, a little bit younger, and yeah, might be just more natural ball in hand, maybe in terms of being a threat himself. I thought he had a very positive introduction as well. All areas of his game, his defence, his line kicking, his goal kicking, his ability to get a backline move, and we're positive. So yeah, we obviously have Harry, we've got Sam Prendergast, we've JJ, we've McCarthy, they're playing this weekend. We've Flannery now getting some game time up in Ulster. So we're in it, and Joey obviously injured, but it mightn't be as much of a worry as maybe it looked 6 months ago about who would replace Johnny.
And like, without doing anything wrong, Ross Byrne has found himself in a tricky situation now with this injury landing at a pretty brutal time, JP.
Yeah, and look, that's just the nature of the game. Like, it'd be interesting to see who starts 10 against Connacht, and who will start 10 against La Rochelle. I don't think, further to what Birch was saying there, I think Frawley had a fantastic game. He just looks comfortable on the ball, and for a lad that hasn't got much game time, he just comes onto the pitch and slots into the system perfectly well, knows it inside out. Like, I wouldn't imagine that he would have got many reps within that system. So it was as much a mental challenge for him to come in and just get the Leinster machine going. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he starts against Connacht, or if they go with maybe Harry or Harry Byrne or Sam Prendergast. But for Ross, yeah, it is very difficult. But I think Frawley might have been in a similar scenario himself. Like, he struggled a good bit with injury over the last number of years, and maybe in his own mind hasn't put a foot wrong. But it's just kind of the ruthless nature of what it is to be a Leinster rugby player. I mean, like, you're injured or someone there is good. to take your place, and that internal pressure there from the younger players that come through, like they realize who they're playing for, they realize the players that are there. So when they do get a chance, they want to capitalize on it to the fullest. Like that makes for a very powerful, rugby environment where everyone wants to succeed, and when they get a chance, they do their best to do it. So yeah, look, Frawley will get his chance, whether it's this week or next week. It's up to him to, I suppose, to hold on to the jersey.
Yeah, it's a good point on Frawley, actually, because 12 months ago, he actually did seem like the heir apparent, Birch, for potentially long-term number 10. He was starting for Ireland A. He was involved in that squad, picks up a knee injury against Ireland A, and only gets back into the squad at the tail end of the Six Nations. So there's sliding doors all over the place. And, that injury probably led to Jack Crowley getting that run against Australia a few weeks later. So so many different small little moments having a big impact on other people.
Yeah, well, the thing is to take your chance. And like, I think, to be fair, if you look at Frawley's career, whether he's played centre, fullback, or 10 for Leinster, we've always been impressed by him. But that was probably the biggest occasion. Now Johnny's gone, we're probably even more interested, because when Johnny was there, you just knew he was number one. So you'd have small chats around who might succeed him. But I think he's always taken his chance, and he was in the Irish squad till quite late in the summer. Farrell rates him, knows about him. He's obviously a utility back, but there may be just an argument now that let him off, let him play. I think he should play this week. He deserves to play, and I'm not sure. I know Ross is out for this week, but yeah, he mightn't be a bad fella to go to La Rochelle as
well. Back on Munster news since the game, Jean Kleyn is among those signing a new contract a couple of days ago. 2 more years of him, considering there were genuine worries around a lot of Munster fans, Birch, and confusion, I think, as well, just around what the long-term future for him was going to be, since he was non-Irish qualified. Graham Rowntree at the start of the month even admitted himself that it did complicate things when Kleyn went back playing rugby with South Africa, because he was no longer an NIQ player. And he admitted as well yesterday there were other clubs sniffing around. That's a massive bit of business for Munster to get another 2 years of Jean Kleyn.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm actually delighted for him, because my understanding was he had made plans to make Limerick his home long term, and that was certainly very much on his mind. And obviously then he gets a chance to play for South Africa because he hasn't got picked for Ireland, and I would have hated him for that to be taken away from him, because he's been a brilliant servant to Munster, and they really value him and love him, and they're allowed. I think it's good by the RFU to allow them to make that choice. You know what I mean? I like, effectively they should have autonomy over what foreign player they use, and they could have gone to the market and got a different second row or whatever, but not be as sure he was going to fit into the environment and be as valuable a member of the dressing room as Kleyn is. So it's great. Obviously, it means I'm pretty sure RG will be gone, but that's okay. I think RG, obviously, he's been injured a lot, but he did his part. He helped him get over the line and win a trophy, right? So, and there's been lots of foreign players who've come over the last 12 years and haven't been able to do that. So it's unlucky on him, but obviously he'll hopefully get back and have a role this season. And yeah, for Kleyn, I think it's a positive by Munster that they're able to look after him, and he obviously wanted to stay, and there would have been other clubs looking at him, but good piece of business, and it's great for him to have it done early as well, and he can now concentrate on doing it on the field. Yeah,
particularly the early nature of it. I've one more question that I'll put to both of you around Munster before we move on to Ulster. Who should the new Munster captain be?
JP?
Yeah, I don't know. There's plenty of candidates within that squad. I don't know if it's a curveball, but I think Jack Crowley should be made captain. Like, he's a young 10. They have big aspirations for him. And they're valid. They're very valid aspirations given the performances we've seen. I would give him the captaincy to try and, give him a taste of if you look at what Johnny Sexton done for Ireland, he's the leader, the general. I don't think it would be any harm to give Jack Crowley that captaincy, to maybe put him into that kind of mold, so that it might work against him in terms it's something else that he needs to concentrate on. Like, he's still a young player. But if I was to pick a captain, yeah, I think I'd give it to Jack Crowley. I'd like to see him develop more as a leader, more as a voice, more as a decision maker. And like, the reality of it is, there's plenty of experienced forwards on the pitch that he can work well with. Yeah, that's probably who my choice would be. I don't know, it might be a bit off the mark, but that's who I'd go with.
Well, Graham Rowntree he's never been afraid since he came to Munster of putting young players in uncomfortable environments and promoting them maybe a little bit earlier than a lot of people would have. Birch, who'd be getting your vote?
Yeah, it's not bad
so much, by the way, not so much who do you think will Rowntree give it to. I want to know, who do you think should have it?
For first time in this pod, I'm actually not going to answer that. I've been thinking about it. I like JP's reasoning. I don't know. I don't know enough. I don't know enough about them as individuals. Ty Byrne would come to my mind. I think he's phenomenally impressive for them. He's a quietish guy, but he's gone to Munster and being a huge part of that. He leads from the front. Obviously, he's a world-class player. I wouldn't have any issue with Crowley. I think he has something really special on and off the field. And I don't think it would hamper him in any way. But yeah, I didn't. I mightn't read the memo. I mightn't have read the question, whatever. But yeah, I haven't any strong preference. But I think I trust Rowntree and those coaches. I think they've made a lot of really smart decisions to get it right. And probably, I think they should go for someone who's going to be around for a while. Is going to be around for maybe the next 4 or 5 years, and let them grow into it and nurture that rather than just a stopgap. But I think they will do that.
Yeah, and it's mad, even as he pointed out himself. He's the first Munster coach for 10 years who's had to actually make this decision. Yeah. So he may as well spend a bit of time and make sure he has the right fella. So that's Munster. They're taking on the Glasgow Warriors, Musgrave Park this Friday night. And we'll finish off talking about Ulster. They were beaten by Glasgow at the weekend. And Birch started well in that match. Given the squad they had sent over to Glasgow, though, it did always seem like it was going to be tough to maintain a performance like that for 80 minutes. There were very, very experienced players out there, but there was a lot of inexperienced players out there, and Glasgow is as tough a place as it is to go.
Yeah, I think Ulster have already used over 40 players. They've really got through them, and they weren't at their best in terms of full availability or full strength. Went 14-0 up, I think, and you think from there, well, we can get a big win here, but they started to get ripped apart pretty easily. And Glasgow are very hard to beat over there. Franco Smith hasn't played a really good brand of rugby, but it's not like, it's kind of a bit like Scotland, where it looks really good, but if you actually stand up to it, and it's not foolproof. And I think Ulster were disappointed in the end with how they fell away. Dan McFarlane was quite disappointed with refereeing. He felt that was a big factor in it. But I think there's other things Ulster can control a little bit better. And John Bell is a big task there. I mean, there doesn't seem to be that desire to defend that there is in other provinces. And there's a lot of days where they're quite poor, so I find are easy breakdown. So that's the big thing for them. Their line-out maul is very strong. At times, their attacking game can be good. They probably still need to find out who's going to be their 10. And obviously, they were a little bit unlucky. They had an injury in the warm-up, and Doka ended up having to play at the end. But yeah, I don't see Ulster. In my opinion, they're the weakest of the four at the moment. I think Connacht have more potential to grow this season, whereas I think Ulster maybe a little bit stagnant.
4 wins out of 6 so far. So JP, they are looking in a reasonable place in the table, but if you look at the fixtures as well, they probably have had a decent run of it. They've had, they started out against Deborah. They were at home against the Lions as well. Yeah. Edinburgh this weekend. Like, if Edinburgh were to go to Belfast and pull off a bit of an upset, which they haven't really done on the road in quite some time, it would leave Ulster in a pretty uninspiring position.
Yeah.
With some tough games to come, you know?
Yeah, like we saw a similar performance. Like I was at the Ulster Connacht game. Like Ulster didn't have the strongest team out that day either. But we're still able to get a good lead in the first half. Connacht came back on that same day, saw something similar against Glasgow. It's not one specific area that they're being beaten in, if that makes sense. So like we saw, and look, Glasgow are an exceptional team. They've loads of strings to their bow. They can cut you whatever way they want, really. We saw them do it through Maul. We saw them, cut down through the wide channels as well towards the back end of the game. I think and then they can do it with pick and goes. They let in tries through pick and goes as well. It's more like Birch talked about it. It's more their mentality. They're more their doggedness to defend. I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on it, Neil. It's hard to put a finger on it. Like there is a bit of work to be done there. But I'm not. Yeah, if Edinburgh went over and got a result against Ulster, they would be taking some long looks at themselves above in Kingspan.
Yeah, and they're heading in now into the stage of the season that ultimately broke them last year, Birch, when they went on that horror run through December and January. The games are only getting harder from pretty much this point on. Once you get into Europe, Interpros over Christmas, more Europe then after that. Like, they need to navigate this period pretty well.
Yeah, I think Kitchoff obviously has to deliver from the start. Has to make a big impact. I think Dave Ewers will. I think his ability to carry and carry well and be abrasive is kind of what they need. So I think he was probably a good recruit. But yeah, like the development stuff is kind of done. I mean, those youngsters that we've been kind of waiting for to come through have all had ample game time now, and the coaching staff is pretty settled. Obviously, this is John Bell's second year with them. The rest are all constant. You'd expect more. They're a well-funded province. Obviously, they would probably like a little bit more money, but they are well-funded in comparison to what they're up against in the URC, bar Munster, Leinster. So they're going to have to deliver. And yeah, 4 from 6 looks great. It looks fine, but I think there's tougher challenges ahead, and I haven't been convinced so far that they're going to step up to the mark.
Yeah, be interesting to see this weekend. That's where we will leave it, guys. We're all out of time. Birch, thanks a million for joining us as always. JP, thanks for coming on. We'll get you on again soon enough. Just a reminder, Connacht against Leinster is live on RT2 and RT Player this Saturday evening, and live radio commentary as well on RT Radio 1 Extra. TV coverage underway from 7 o'clock. Kickoff is 7:35, and we'll be back on the podcast this time next week. Fellas, thanks a million.
Thanks,
Neil. See you.